All right, welcome back to another presentation re-recording. So today I'm going to present to you the presentation which I gave at the Avijozi Festival 2024 in Johannesburg, South Africa, just about 2 or 3 weeks ago on the 15th of September. So I'm going to present it as always, as if you'd be sitting live in the audience. There were just two very small videos which are kind of still in work in progress that I showed back then. They are not in this presentation, but you will see them on the YouTube channel in the upcoming time anyway. So without further ado, let's dive into the presentation. All right, so the topic today, storytelling through 3D environments for visual effects and games. The goal today is to inspire and hopefully also you learn something about storytelling and about 3D environments. Let's continue. A couple of inspirations already to begin, just like two of the images that we have produced over the last couple of months, and then another little video that is just a bit of fun and gives you the link to games. I love it. All right. 3D environments, right? 3D cities. This is kind of what we are talking about. Large environments, moods, and just telling stories in general. How do we tell stories in those cities, in those environments? All right, the agenda. Just quick outline of everything. Intro, check. Speaker coming up. Then what is Urban doing as a company? Technical challenges, just briefly. Storytelling, the main part. Architecture, storytelling parameters, inspirations, and then we're almost done. All right. My name is Matthias Bühler, and I'm the founder and CTO of Urban. So at the moment we're 15 people, and we are located in Switzerland. Now, my background originally is in architecture, and my first 3D steps in, steps in 3D graphics were in about 1992. And so altogether, I've been working in so-called procedural modeling for about 15 years now, or pretty much exactly 15 years. Then I am a city engine specialist. What city engine is, we will, for those that don't know it yet, we will briefly cover what it is. And then also, I'm a Gnomon workshop instructor of a DVD about city engine, which I produced, which is also 10 years ago already, but it's the content is still very relevant. And then in my last job, also a couple of years ago, I was working exactly in this field, creating large environments at Scanline Visual Effects. All right. So if we look at the typical 3D project, and this is independent of the industry, whether it is in visual effects, games, or other types of visualization projects, you have a little bit the following structure. So you have a design phase, then you are creating the 3D assets, then with the assets you create the environment, and then you animate everything like the animation and effects like explosions and all of those things. Basically storytelling, and then the visualization is how do you generate the final pixels. Now, In the design phase, what you typically do is you're producing the artwork, the specification of the pipeline, so kind of technical and creative things together. The assets, obviously you're modeling them, you're texturing them, and then you are going through a phase of so-called look development, shading and so on, to so that it's like perfectly finished. Then in the environment you have the layout of like literally assembling just or the environment itself, and then you have other elements of the atmosphere, for example. We'll be talking about this stuff in a few minutes. So basically the environment is kind of a container for the story. And then animation and effects, here you are actually telling the story, and then in the end, with the visualization, you have the rendering and or the compositing for in the visual effects industry, or in games, obviously you have the kind of the running game where you see everything. Now we are basically specializing in these first 3 points, so design, assets, and environments. Now we also do have some expertise, as you have seen in the visuals so far already, of the kind of last part of the visualization, which is just necessary to be able to show the stuff that we're doing, right? But usually when doing consulting, or in general when we are creating our own content, then we are basically saying we are focusing on the environment creation, from basically artwork to having the environment finished. So that's the niche, that's the specialty, right? As a company, as I briefly just mentioned, so we specialize in the creation of 3D architecture and environments, and we're built with 2 business units. So on the one hand side, we have Urban Solutions that, as the name implies, creates solutions, custom-made solutions for our clients. So this can be consulting or other things. Then on the other side, we have Urban Studios that is basically just creating its own 3D content that we produce for others to use. Why this specialization? I mean, stories play in environments, right? And it's so there's so many stories that basically play in environments, so it's kind of it is a common problem. And creating environments technically is something that is very hard to solve. And there are many different types of 3D projects. So in this one example here of Urban Solutions, and the Solutions business unit, what we've been doing here is to help the city of Zurich, the city administration, with, for example, the specification of how they can improve or kind of extend their existing 3D city data, or their digital twin and the underlying GIS data, how this could be extended with historical timeline, but then also come in and help with the creation of these procedural rule sets in for City Engine. We'll have a look at this afterwards. So they can actually generate large amounts of historic representations of the buildings. It's just one of many 3D city types, right? Here's a visualization of this project. So we've been collaborating with the city of Zurich now for multiple years. And what you see here is actual open data, open GIS data that is available for free. And we just took a section of this data, specifically, this is now the year 1800, and we just built a little visualization pipeline around it. Obviously, this is not directly used for games or for visual effects, but this is more a historically accurate representation. All right, then on the studio side, this is our shop, and there are many 3D buildings on the shop that can be used for many different applications, and we're also creating more and more importers for different tools. We've seen some buildings. Now here you also see that we have also some assets that we're producing and selling. And some more assets. Then just some visuals of some of the skyscrapers which we have. All right. Cool. Technology. Let's have a brief look at CD Engine. So CD Engine is one of those tools that is very key for our work. And as you see, how it works here is you draw the underlying street network first within CD Engine, and then CD Engine basically computes, based on some parameters which you can obviously edit, a so-called block subdivision. And then on top of those blocks, so these are basically some parcels and the polygons that are created, you can then on top of that create a procedural rule which, for example, cuts the parcels into different parts that have vegetation and buildings placed and parking and so on and so on. In this case here, what we are doing is just basically we take the buildings that we have on our shop that are kind of static library elements, and we are producing those procedural rules that just basically place them in a very smart manner using this procedural system. And once you have the system, as you see here, it's really easy to edit an entire city. What we see here is 4 of those rule types that we are developing for CD Engine. One of them is a kind of industrial distribution. The second one is residential. The third one commercial, and the fourth is downtown. Now, all of these things obviously at the moment are American architecture or urban layout typologies, then we are going to extend these things into different geotypical styles or geographic styles eventually. Now, obviously, there's also a completely separate rule set specifically just for the streets, but we'll see some more of that in a minute. So once you have designed the layout, and this is about 3 by 3 kilometers or 2 by 2 miles approximately, you see the block subdivision. Once you have assigned the procedural rules and you generate the models from all of those shapes, what you end up is with this complete 3D city model. Now, this is just a preview within CD Engine with just very kind of low resolution stand-in geometries or proxy geometries. But this is just so that that our machine doesn't die. All right. Here you see another quick preview. Left-hand side, as previously mentioned, the shapes with the whole layout of the city. On the right-hand side, you see the generated model from that. Then if you say, okay, let's select this specific part and export it, and we go in the following case here, we are going to Unreal. This is just a very quick and dirty preview of how this will look like. Now in this case, we are switching actually all of the trees and the tree positions, all of those things. We're actually going towards Unreal. We're switching to a PCG system that scatters the trees, but that's just one of those many technical details. All right, now you have certainly heard about virtual production. The most famous example of the last couple of years, The Mandalorian, and you also see kind of in this image here where we are going with this is, so the idea is that we are creating the content so that it can also run in real time. Not only in virtual production, but also in for example, games. And so what we see here is we see this city, or let's say environment, that basically has a diameter of about 8 kilometers, so that's about 6 miles. And if we want to be able to run this in real time, so for example, in Unreal, by flying through this environment with a gamepad, all of the content actually needs to be very optimized for game engines. So you need to have levels of detail and all of those elements, right? So let's have a very brief look at a video. Here's 3 of the skyscrapers which we have, and obviously we also see that kind of storytelling is, there's a lot of atmosphere in this image. And let's actually talk about the interiors here that you see, this 3-dimensional effect. What we have developed for this, because we're also still kind of talking about technology, is we have developed this cross-platform solution of this so-called parallax occlusion effect. So what you see here in this short clip is that there's this wall polygon that has 0 thickness, yet when looking into these into the windows, basically, there's a kind of smart material effect that shows you an interior, but it's not actually 3D, it's just a mathematical effect with a intelligent lookup of mapping textures from a cube. So this has been a tremendous amount of effort to produce, but what it allows us is to have these interiors also in a real-time context, so you don't have to build like thousands and thousands of actual 3D interiors, which would just kill any game engine. And for this, obviously, we had to produce a lot of rooms. So there's like 700 different interiors which we have built of all the different types that we needed. So we have industrial, we have residential, we have cafes, we have shopping, and so on and so on. You see a couple of examples here, just a previews, which were the foundation of the for these interiors. Now what you see here is one video that is recorded just flying up on one of those skyscrapers, and that is actually recorded in the Unity game engine. You see it's a massive building. All right. Sweet. So you see there's a lot of technology kind of going into architecture in general and 3D environments, but storytelling is a whole different aspect to everything. Now, one of my favorite images about storytelling in environments or through environments is this still from the movie Dread, and I'm still very fascinated by the fact of how this image is composed and how strong the message is, basically, with these mega blocks that are like 200 floors high, with the kind of dense atmosphere. It doesn't feel healthy, right? But then what I'm usually interested in is, what would it feel to live somewhere down here in the constant shade of these blocks? What are the living conditions there? Because you have no more sun, no more healthy sunlight, no healthy air, and it's gritty, it's grimy, it's dangerous. And how do you convey this information about the world? And there's so many layers of storytelling going on in just this image, right? So these are the aspects I'm very curious about in general, and we want to address also during this presentation. Stories usually, or visual stories at least, they start with a storyboard. So here's one of the storyboards that we did in-house. Then here's our kind of story sketches, you could say, of one of the other projects. So this was kind of planning an ideal city if everything was perfect in the world, with different styles of urban layouts or elements of urban layouts. So kind of more circular, more flowy, with square combined with floaty organic forms and so on. And then from that you move on, right? Once you understand in which direction you want to go, and then you can come up with something like this. Now this is also in City Engine, also using one of our our visualization. Here's another view of this city. I mean, it's a massive city, right? And then a visualization of that. Now, architecture is an actor. What does this mean? So if you look at these two images of real-world buildings, they are built in the style of Art Deco. You can see this down here, Art Deco. Beautiful design. Art Deco was kind of around 1910, 1920, 30, 40. Was when some of those very famous buildings were built. Some of them still are in this style built today. It's just a little bit more rare. But then you also see Art Nouveau. You see down here Art Nouveau, which is obviously much more, let's say, inspired by nature. And what does this have to do with storytelling as an actor? Now, the example is amazing. It's pretty clear. Like if you look at the Hobbit or the Lord of the Rings in general, this Middle Earth as a universe, you see that the dwarven fortress, the dwarven architecture is literally a kind of, or got inspired by Art Deco, while the Elvish architecture was literally literally inspired by Art Nouveau. And you see that architecture, it indeed is an actor. It's a silent actor, but it tells you the story. It conveys the world or the location where you are. So crafting crafting a realistic environment that that helps you telling your story is of utmost importance. Let's do a little bit of maths. A little bit of kind of construction physics. So if you have a beam, like whether this is a wooden beam or a steel beam doesn't really matter. Now you just put it onto like two little holding positions. You just place it on top. So the amount that the beam bends downwards, this value W, is actually computed by this formula. And this formula mainly depends on, let's say, the kind of the force that acts on it. So even if you put some pressure on it, but then also the length here, the length of the beam, the modulus of elasticity. So that's basically which material are you using, and then the moment of inertia. That's a geometric property of the profile of the beam that you're using. Now, why I'm showing this? Here you see the length of the beam. There's this to the power of 3. So what this means is if the longer L gets, the exponentially stronger this displacement basically gets, or the distortion, right? This W value. So what this means is, for example, if you make the beam twice as long, the distortion in the middle will be 2 to the power of 3, which is 8 times more, right? So what does this mean? It means that your construction or your choices of the construction have to deal with physical nature. So gravity is working and is changing your architectural constructions, and you would construct a building differently if it were standing, for example, on the moon, because you have less gravity, or somewhere on this on the planet, on this watery planet of the movie Interstellar, where gravity is absolutely enormous, right? So you see these the influence. And if you look at something like this, this building in New York, you see that it's a slightly different construction, right? It's not a beam, but you see that there's some sort of construction that looks like a massive beam that is actually 3 entire stories high. The construction actually implies or underlines the weight that has to be channeled from the entire top of the skyscraper into these into the core, obviously, but on the side also into these absolutely massive columns. So there are these things. Architects typically show these things quite honestly, in the sense of we are like, it's an honest visualization or honest display of the construction and what's actually happening by showing the dimensions and everything. It shows that there is an actual massive weight that we have to deal with, right? So this is definitely something that when you are creating 3D buildings, for example, it just helps to tell the story by adding all of those details. Just give it the weight that is corresponding to, for example, the gravity in the world you are describing. Just a technical nerdy detail here, but what you can also do is so-called precasting. So if you take, for example, a steel beam, you can pre-bend so that once added to the building and under the full load of the entire building that is constructed on top of it, step by step, that the distortion will actually be resulting in a fully horizontal beam. So by knowing these mechanics or physics, you can actually consider all of those aspects to still get perfectly straight lines in the design after you have the full load, right? Now, there are more of these details, and I've talked about these things also in previous presentations. There are multiple floors that have just technical installations, like massive machines for heating, air cleaning, water pumps, and so on and so on. And they are so crucial for the realism, in the sense of if you just had just glass here, it would just look, let's say, boring and unrealistic, because it's exactly these things that are necessary for the building to actually work in physical nature. So it's like kind of you could say it's almost like the lungs the building is breathing. So without the lungs, without these technical details, you are just losing a lot of realism. All right, then a hidden detail in the Taipei 1 building in Taiwan. It's this massive skyscraper also, and pretty much at the top here, hidden inside, just because we were talking about gravity, right? Gravity and forces in general. Let's also talk about earthquakes. So it's inside this building, there's this steel ball suspended that actually helps as a counterweight to dampen any horizontal forces coming from an earthquake. So you see the scale of this thing. I just specifically searched for a picture where you can see some people. This steel ball is 550 tons of weight, and it's just there to eliminate basically these earthquake forces, to stabilize the entire building. It's mind-blowing. It's absolutely mind-blowing what engineers are kind of coming up with to still be able to create these massive buildings. Right? Cool. Let's switch to the storytelling parameters. A little bit of theory. All right. So first things first, obviously you can choose your camera position in an environment. So you can have a camera like this. Then you can also have a camera like this. Very, very entry level, right? Then from now on, we're kind of coming back to this perspective. So here you see the default. So this is the basic look, and we're going to build on top of that. So the next element that you can change is the aspect ratio of the image. So this one is a little bit more, this is 4:3, it's like more a classic aspect ratio, while this one is perfectly 16:9, 16 by 9. So let's go actually back to the original quickly. So it's 2.2 approximately to 1, very cinematic, while this one is a little bit more square, obviously, and this is kind of standard 16 by 9. Now, you can also change the lens. Here we have a tele lens where the camera is actually located a lot further back, but you can then also say we have a wide lens. It's all choices, again, it's all choices about how you want to present your story. Then depth of field. There's a deep depth of field, so everything is in focus pretty much up to the horizon, you could say. Shallow depth of field, just the foreground is in focus, and everything else is blurred. Could be a little bit interpreted as like a miniature look, but why not, right? We've seen this with the cute animation at the very beginning with the robot. Then close depth of field, kind of just focus in the foreground while the rest is blurred. And then just the focus on the far distance and the foreground is actually blurred. Then another element, a lot more, let's say, a psychological aspect, the sun direction. So you can have this one where the shadow is actually also facing away from you. And even further away from you, it just gets a little more friendly, you could say, right? There's still some kind of dark areas, while here everything is lit, or almost everything is lit. It's super friendly, it's super... There's nothing scary, for example, in this image. Then we can also switch the weather. Massive impact on the mood, on the overall impression of the image, right? So in this case, we... because we chose to visualize these things in Unreal, or it's actually very easy for us to switch all of those factors. Then there's this kind of foggy morning feeling, maybe a little bit of dusty sandstorm look. Huge impact on the overall feeling or mood that you get from this image. Also because of the strong, let's say, hue in the sense of colorization. Then the light also very specifically, not just the sun direction, but how do you play with the light itself? The sun being directly visible. Then very similar, just playing with the light or with the lights after sunset, for example. Beautiful example here, made also by our artists. And then the LUT. The LUT is a lookup table. So in this case we have I think it's the interstellar LUT. In this case here, giving a complete different mood than, I believe this is the Sicario movie LUT, which is much more, let's say, it has a completely different feel again to it. And so the LUT, or the lookup table, is pretty much mimicking the raw physical film material to which film was recorded years ago, and in some cases still is, right? All right. Then just a little bit of a, let's say, a more rare thing to talk about, but I believe it's also one of those things that is very important for storytelling in general, or can be, is this so-called tilt shift lens. You see here there's a tilt, that's a rotation, and then the shift, you see this entire thing here is shifting the lens in relationship to the film back here, or to the sensor. And with this, what you can achieve is images that with a standard lens, when looking upwards, everything is kind of has quite a strong perspective effect. But with a tilt shift, when setting it correctly, you can actually make all of those perspective lines pretty much vertical. So this is very commonly used either in architecture photography, or sometimes also in portrait photography, because it gives kind of very natural, beautiful looking proportions. Cool. Yeah, so basically you see there are so many aspects that you can control with light, with atmosphere, with lens, with everything. And but then also, obviously, this was just showing one very simple urban scene. But if you're building your environment, like or what we also have seen in the movie Dread just before, there are all of these elements coming together. So just a couple of examples here that we produced in-house, where all of these aspects are basically kind of chosen together for the specific look. So there's this image here with the pedestrians in kind of downtown fake LA somewhere. You also here you see the storytelling element is the motion blur, even in the pedestrians. So that's deliberately crafted for this image. Then this image here has a lot of symmetry in the image, also with the sun very deliberately having been chosen at a time where it's orthogonal to the main facade, kind of coming from the right, with the person standing in the middle, exactly in the shade. So there's a lot of compositional choices that were made very, very deliberately here, right? So it doesn't feel really very natural. Obviously, it feels photorealistic, but it feels much more like a fine art piece than something that is kind of just real life photography. And then also this image, which we produced recently for our new flyer, where you have a camera that is very far away, kind of even almost above the highest skyscrapers, maybe taken from a helicopter, then with a zoom or telezoom lens, kind of focusing in on an interesting part of this city. You also see there's a lot of, you could say, blue tones, shadow areas, which is also something that is very, very deliberately crafted for the overall mood of this picture. Yeah, so to slowly wrap it up, just a few more inspirations in general for you, and let's dive in. Inspirations, obviously, books, especially for me personally. I own these two books. They're absolutely fantastic. So Harry Potter, the blueprints in the sense of this is a book showing the actual film set constructions and the dimensions. It's a pretty thick book, but fantastic inspiration to look at. And then there's the Star Wars blueprint. There's actually two books, same principle, just for the film set construction of for the original Star Wars movies. You see what are the dimensions, how big are the film sets, and so on. So very, very inspiring also to look at. And then again in Unreal, seeing just this random industrial site by sunshine, by rain, and because we can, also by snow. And you see that just the ability to take, for example, game engines in this, in whether this is for games or in film or in virtual production, for example, to able to play with these things in real time and develop the mood, develop the atmosphere and all of the look in real time is just so much more efficient and fun. Then another image which I made some time ago. It's just obviously very, very saturated, dramatic clouds. Showing also kind of some of the 3D interiors, or kind of the 3D effect interiors that also have emission with different like light colors and intensities. Just in general a simple image, but kind of still I find it beautiful. And then another image also showing a larger environment, kind of backlit, a lot of haze and potentially also dust. It's almost a little bit eerie looking, but there's definitely emotion in this picture. And another one showing some sort of almost, you could say, dystopian location, kind of a little bit, you could say, inspired also by the Dread world, or by potentially kind of Blade Runner-esque inspirations. So yeah, just another one of those. Now, very recently, we also started developing another very important aspect of the procedural city layouting system we're creating in-house using City Engine. These are the bridges and overpasses. So I'm just showing you a couple of images. So this is not like a finished, polished visualization. This is more like a work in progress made in Unreal. But still, it's kind of showing in which direction we're continuing with our tools. Sweet. So outro. For just a little bit of a pitch for those that don't know the 3D Environment podcast, I'm the host of that one, and you can find it either on my personal website, or there's also a LinkedIn group. So you can find it also there, or on Simplecast. But all of the links you can find directly on my website. Yeah, this was basically it. There's not going to be a QA today because this is just a re-recording as always. But if you do have some questions, let me know in the comments, or send us an email at info@vrbn.io. Thank you again, and I really hope that you learned something. And yeah, see you next time. Bye bye.